The land of Gilead was a place of unrest, a patchwork of rocky hills and scattered settlements where survival demanded strength. The people of Israel had been struggling, caught in a cycle of disobedience and deliverance. Time and again, they turned from God, worshiping idols and abandoning his ways. As a result, their enemies grew bold, and now the Ammonites were threatening to crush them completely. Jephthah was an unlikely hero. Born the son of Gilead and a woman of disrepute, his lineage marked him as an outcast. His half-brothers, jealous and resentful, had driven him away from his father's house, leaving him to fend for himself. "You'll have no part in our inheritance," they had said. With bitterness in his heart, Jephthah fled to the land of Tob, where he gathered a band of misfits, men who, like him, had been cast aside by society. In Tob, Jephthah built a life as a warrior and leader. His reputation grew not just for his skill in battle, but for his cunning mind. Yet, despite his success, a shadow hung over him. He was a man shaped by rejection, living far from the people and land he had once called home. Meanwhile, the people of Gilead were desperate. The Ammonites had laid siege to their towns, stealing their crops and livestock. Fear gripped the region as the elders of Gilead gathered to discuss their plight. "What can we do?" one elder asked, his voice trembling. "The Ammonites are stronger than us. If we don't act, they'll destroy us all." "We need a leader," another replied. "Someone who can unite our people and stand against the Ammonites." A murmur of agreement spread through the room. But who? Who could they turn to? One elder, a man with a lined face and thoughtful eyes, finally spoke. "There is one man who can lead us, Jephthah." The room fell silent. Jephthah's name was like a spark, igniting a mix of hope and unease. "Jephthah?" someone scoffed. "The outcast? The son of a harlot?" "He's also the best warrior we have," the elder replied firmly. "If anyone can save us, it's him." The elders exchanged uneasy glances. They knew the elder was right, but could they swallow their pride and ask Jephthah, the very man they had cast out, to return and save them? Jephthah was sharpening his sword when he saw the elders of Gilead approaching. He recognized them immediately, their robes marking them as men of authority. Setting the blade aside, he rose to meet them, his expression guarded. "What brings you to Tob?" he asked, his tone cool. "Have you come to mock me, or is there something you need?" The eldest among them stepped forward. "Jephthah, we need your help," he said, his voice heavy with humility. "The Ammonites are attacking us. We want you to come back and lead our army." Jephthah laughed, a sound filled with bitterness. "Now you need me?" he said. "You drove me out of my father's house. You treated me like I was nothing. And now, when you're in trouble, you come crawling back?" The elder bowed his head. "You're right, Jephthah. We wronged you, but we're asking you to forgive us. Lead us, and we will make you the head of all Gilead." Jephthah studied them, his expression unreadable. Finally he said, "Swear it. Swear before the Lord that if I lead you to victory, you will make me your leader." The elders raised their hands in a solemn oath. "We swear it," they said. "The Lord is our witness." Jephthah returned to Gilead, his arrival marked by both curiosity and celebration. The people, weary from years of oppression, saw him as a symbol of hope. Yet, whispers followed him wherever he went. "Can we trust him?" one man muttered. "He's our best chance," another replied. Jephthah wasted no time. He gathered the warriors of Gilead and began to prepare for battle. But before raising his sword, he sent messengers to the king of the Ammonites, hoping to avoid unnecessary bloodshed. "Why are you attacking us?" the message read. The reply came swiftly. "Israel took our land when they came out of Egypt. Now we want it back." Jephthah responded with a message of his own, recounting Israel's journey from Egypt and the battles they had fought to claim the land God had given them. "We did not take your land," he wrote. "The Lord, the God of Israel, gave us this territory. If your God, Chemosh, has given you land, do you not keep it? So why should we not keep what the Lord has given us?" The Ammonite king ignored Jephthah's words, and the path to peace was closed. Jephthah stood on a hill overlooking the battlefield, his warriors assembled behind him. The sun rose, casting a warm light over the land, but Jephthah's heart was heavy. Turning his face to the sky, he prayed, his voice steady but filled with urgency. "Lord," he said, "if you give me victory over the Ammonites, I will make a vow to you. Whatever comes out of the door of my house to meet me when I return will be yours, and I will offer it as a burnt offering." The men behind him shifted uneasily, but Jephthah's focus remained on the battlefield. With a cry, he raised his sword, and his warriors surged forward, ready to fight. The battlefield roared with the sound of clashing swords, the cries of warriors, and the pounding of feet against the earth. The Ammonites surged forward, their numbers vast and their confidence high. They believed they had the upper hand, that Israel would crumble before their might. But at the head of Israel's army stood Jephthah, his sword gleaming in the sunlight, his voice carrying over the chaos. "Do not waver!" he shouted to his men. "The Lord fights with us today." With his rallying cry, the Israelites pushed back with renewed vigor. Jephthah's strategies, honed through years of battle in Tob, proved masterful. He directed his men with precision, sending them into calculated formations that disrupted the Ammonite lines. Hours passed, and the tide of battle shifted. The Ammonites, once so confident, began to falter under the relentless onslaught. Jephthah fought at the front, his presence a beacon of courage to his men. His sword was swift, his movements deliberate, and his determination unshakable. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, the Ammonites' forces began to scatter. Their king, seeing his army unravel, ordered a retreat. The Israelites, though exhausted, raised a cheer of victory that echoed across the battlefield. Jephthah stood among his men, his chest heaving with exertion, his sword dripping with the blood of battle. He raised his weapon high, and his voice boomed, "The Lord has delivered the Ammonites into our hands." The soldiers roared in agreement, their faith in both Jephthah and the God of Israel solidified. The victory celebrations began as the army marched back to Gilead. Men sang songs of triumph, their spirits lifted by the success of their mission. They spoke of Jephthah's leadership, his courage, and his ability to inspire. But Jephthah walked in silence. The weight of his vow hung over him like a dark cloud. "Whatever comes out of the door of my house to meet me will be yours, Lord," he had said. At the time, it had seemed like a bold and fitting promise. Now, as the reality of his words set in, his stomach churned with dread. As the procession neared Gilead, the townspeople lined the streets to greet their returning heroes. The air was filled with the sounds of tambourines and cheers, the people's joy tangible. Children ran ahead, eager to catch a glimpse of their fathers and brothers who had gone to war. Jephthah's house came into view, its familiar stone walls standing sturdy and proud. His steps slowed, his pulse quickening. His heart whispered a silent plea. "Lord, Let it be anything but her. Then, the door to his home burst open, and a figure stepped out. Jephthah froze, his worst fear realized. It was his daughter. She was his only child, the light of his life, and she came running toward him, her face glowing with pride and joy. She wore a white dress, her arms outstretched as she danced to the rhythm of tambourines. "Father!" she cried, her voice ringing clear above the noise. "Welcome home! The Lord has given you victory!" Jephthah's sword slipped from his hand, clattering to the ground. The cheers of the crowd faded into silence as he fell to his knees, his face buried in his hands. "No," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Not you, my daughter. Not you." His daughter stopped mid-dance, her joy replaced with concern. She approached him, kneeling by his side. "Father, what is it? Why are you weeping?" Jephthah looked up, tears streaming down his face. "I have made a vow to the Lord," he said, his voice trembling. "A vow I cannot break. Whatever came out of my house to meet me would be offered to the Lord as a burnt offering, and it is you, my only child." The crowd murmured, their jubilation replaced by shock and sorrow. Jephthah's daughter stared at him for a moment, her eyes wide with disbelief. Then, slowly, her expression softened. "Father," she said gently, placing a hand on his shoulder. "If you have made a vow to the Lord, you must fulfill it. He has given you victory, and we must honor him." Jephthah shook his head, his grief overwhelming. "I have brought this upon you," he said. "I never imagined it would be you." His daughter's voice remained calm, though her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "You did not know, Father, and I do not blame you. Let me go into the mountains for 2 months to mourn with my friends. Then I will return, and you may do as you have vowed." Jephthah's heart broke as he granted her request. His daughter left the city, accompanied by her closest friends. The townspeople watched her go, their hearts heavy with sorrow for the young girl whose life was being given in sacrifice. For Jephthah, the victory over the Ammonites now felt like ash in his mouth. He had saved his people, but lost what was most precious to him. In the mountains, Jephthah's daughter wept with her friends, mourning the life she would never have. She grieved not only for herself, but for her father, whose vow had brought them to this moment. Yet through her tears, she held fast to her faith in the God of Israel. "I will not live as others do," she said, "but I will live in the knowledge that my life served a greater purpose." The mountains of Gilead were quiet, the wind carrying whispers through the trees as Jephthah's daughter wandered the rocky paths with her friends. 2 months had passed since she had left her father's home, and the time of mourning was coming to an end. Her heart was heavy, but her resolve was unshaken. The days in the mountains had been bittersweet. She had shared laughter and tears with her closest friends, reminiscing about the life she would leave behind. There were moments of deep sorrow as they spoke of weddings she would never have, children she would never hold, and dreams she would never fulfill. Yet even in the depths of her grief, she found a strange peace. "Do you ever regret your father's vow?" one of her friends asked as they sat beneath a tree, the sun casting golden light over the hills. Jephthah's daughter thought for a moment, her gaze distant. "No," she said finally. "How can I regret something made to honor the Lord? My life is His to use as He wills. If this is the path He has chosen for me, I will walk it with faith." Her friends nodded, their eyes filled with admiration and sadness. Back in Gilead, Jephthah was a man weighed down by guilt. The joy of victory had long since faded, replaced by an unrelenting sorrow. He spent his days pacing the confines of his home, his mind consumed by the knowledge of what awaited his daughter. The people of Gilead spoke in hushed tones about their leader. Some saw him as a man of great faith, willing to honor his vow no matter the cost. Others viewed his decision with disbelief, questioning why such a promise had been made at all. "Surely there must be another way," one elder murmured during a gathering in the town square. "But can we question a vow made to the Lord?" another replied. Jephthah himself avoided such discussions. He knew the weight of his words, the finality of his vow. All he could do was wait for his daughter's return, dreading the moment when he would have to fulfill the promise that had brought them both to this point. The day came sooner than Jephthah had hoped. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the city in shades of amber and purple, Jephthah's daughter appeared at the gates of Gilead. Her head was held high, her step steady, though her eyes betrayed the sorrow she carried. The people of the city gathered to watch her return, their hearts breaking for the girl who walked with such grace toward a fate she had not chosen. Mothers held their children close. Fathers looked on with somber expressions, and the air was thick with silence. Jephthah stood at the gates, his face lined with grief. When he saw her, his knees buckled, and he fell to the ground, tears streaming down his face. "My daughter?" he whispered, his voice choked. "My beloved daughter." She knelt beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Father, do not weep," she said gently. "You made a vow to the Lord, and it must be fulfilled. I am ready." The people of Gilead followed Jephthah and his daughter to the sacred place outside the city where the vow would be honored. The path was lined with torches, their flickering light casting long shadows over the solemn procession. The air was thick with the weight of the moment, the silence broken only by the sound of footsteps and quiet sobs. As they reached the altar, Jephthah turned to his daughter, his hands trembling. "You are my only child," he said, his voice barely audible. "I never meant for this to happen. I never imagined it would be you." She smiled softly, tears glistening in her eyes. "I know, Father, and I forgive you. You have led our people to victory and kept your promise to God. Let us honor him together." The exact nature of what happened next has been debated through the ages. Some believe Jephthah's daughter was offered as a literal sacrifice, her life given to fulfill her father's vow. Others believe she was consecrated to a life of perpetual service to God, remaining unmarried and childless as an act of devotion. What is clear is that her life, as she had known it, ended that day. She became a symbol of faith, courage, and sacrifice, her story etched into the hearts of the people of Gilead. For the rest of his life, Jephthah carried the weight of his decision. Though he continued to lead Israel and defend his people, the loss of his daughter was a burden he could never escape. The people of Gilead, moved by the tragedy, established a tradition of remembrance. Each year, the young women of Israel would gather to mourn Jephthah's daughter, keeping her story alive for generations. As Jephthah sat alone one evening, gazing at the stars, he whispered a prayer. "Lord, forgive me for my foolish vow. I offered what was most precious to me, and I will bear this pain for the rest of my days. But let her sacrifice not be in vain. Let it remind your people of the seriousness of promises made to you and the strength found in faith." The days following his daughter's sacrifice were a blur for Jephthah. The cheers of victory had long faded, replaced by a solemn quiet that hung over Gilead like a heavy cloud. The people whispered his name, not with the same admiration they once had, but with a mix of reverence and sorrow. Jephthah was no longer just a leader or a warrior. He was the man whose vow to the Lord had cost him everything. Jephthah spent much of his time alone, wandering the hills where his daughter had mourned with her friends. He retraced her steps, imagining the conversations she might have had and the laughter that had echoed through these rocks. In these moments, he didn't feel like a mighty judge of Israel. He was just a grieving father, seeking a connection to the daughter he had lost. At night, he would sit by a fire and look up at the stars, his heart heavy with questions. Had his vow been necessary? Could the Lord have accepted his devotion in another way? But each time the doubt crept in, Jephthah reminded himself that his daughter had embraced her fate with faith and courage. If she had not questioned the will of God, how could he? The people of Gilead, too, felt the weight of what had happened. Jephthah's story spread across Israel, serving as both a warning and a lesson. The annual gathering of Israelite women to mourn Jephthah's daughter became a time of reflection and remembrance. Fathers warned their children of the power of words spoken before God, teaching them to approach the Lord with reverence and humility. Mothers shared the story of Jephthah's daughter, not as a tale of despair, but as a testament to unwavering faith. In time, her name became a symbol of devotion. Songs were sung in her honor, stories were passed down, and her legacy endured. Though her life had been cut short, her courage inspired generations to trust in the Lord even when his ways were difficult to understand. Jephthah's leadership as a judge continued, but he ruled with a changed heart. The man who had once been hardened by rejection and bitterness became a voice of wisdom and humility. He urged the people to follow the Lord, not with grand gestures or rash promises, but with steadfast obedience and faith. When disputes arose among the tribes, Jephthah would remind them of the cost of pride and the weight of unconsidered words. "We serve a mighty God," he would say, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "Let us not treat his name lightly. Honor him not with vows, but with lives of faithfulness." As Jephthah's life drew to a close, he often found himself reflecting on the events that had shaped him. The battles he had fought, the victories he had won, and the daughter he had lost were woven together in his memory. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Jephthah stood on a hill overlooking Gilead. The fields stretched out before him, bathed in the golden light of dusk. He thought of his daughter, her face full of joy as she danced with her tambourine, and the strength she had shown in the face of her fate. "Her faith was greater than mine," he whispered, his voice carried by the wind. "May her story continue to teach those who hear it." Jephthah's story is one of triumph and tragedy, faith and folly. It reminds us of the power of promises made before God and the importance of approaching him with humility and reverence. His daughter's sacrifice, though heartbreaking, stands as a testament to the strength found in faith and the enduring legacy of courage. Through their story, the people of Israel learned to trust the Lord more deeply, to think carefully about the words they spoke, and to honor him not just with their lips but with their lives.